So welcome everyone. My name is Brian Fuchs. I'm with Matrix Solutions. We're going to begin today's conversation with a traditional land acknowledgement for the southern Alberta area, which is where I'm located. So Calgary is centered on the place where the bow meets the elbow. It's been a gathering place for Indigenous peoples for millennia. The Blackfoot called this place Mokinstis. So we acknowledge that we live, work, and play in the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai, as well as the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, as well as all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. I'd also like to extend this respect to all the Indigenous peoples across Canada and the traditional lands where Matrix and Montrose operate and where our work takes us. From a personal perspective, I know we've got a great mix of audiences here today. So I've been with Matrix Solutions since 2007, became part of our management team in 2019, and was part of the group that worked to facilitate our acquisition by the Montrose Environmental Group in June of 2023. And so some of you on this call already knew Montrose, and maybe Matrix is new to you. For others, you've known us at Matrix, and Montrose is a bit new to you. And so collectively, we are 3,500 people around the globe working to solve complicated environmental challenges. From a Matrix point of view, one of the most appealing things about joining Montrose was the clear and obvious passion for the environment that was backed up by the extensive investments they've made in recruiting top talent. And that's one of the things that I've seen firsthand very quickly is just how many smart people we get to work with now, which has been really rewarding. In a lot of cases, the Montrose Environmental Group brings capabilities and skills and resources that we never had access to before as part of Matrix. So if you've been a Matrix customer, we can now talk to you about things like treatment technologies, specialized laboratories, system installations, and like you're going to hear about today, a lot around emissions management. It's an area of focus that was never part of Matrix's core offering, and yet teaming up with Montrose, it's an area where they've become leaders in emissions measurement, testing, and mitigation methods, and especially the focus on methane reduction. And so today I'm really excited to be joined by three of our new expert colleagues. And so I'll ask each of them to introduce ourselves. Then we'll go through a panel conversation where we'll have hopefully an engaging conversation amongst the group of us. And we'll end about 40 minutes in and leave some time at the end for questions. And so, as I'm sure you might notice on your screen in Zoom, there's a button at the bottom for Q&A. If you do have questions throughout the conversation or at the end of the conversation, that's going to be the forum there. So if you click on the Q&A, you can type in your questions. We'll get to as many as we can in the time we have allocated, but rest assured, if you ask a question and we run out of time, we'll make sure to follow up with you directly via email afterwards, or we can start a conversation to make sure we delve deeper into whatever your question might be. And so first, by introductions, Josh, do you mind leading us off?
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. It's good to be here. Similar to Brian's story is those who know me and those who don't. I started a company called Green Path Energy based in Calgary 17 years ago, specializing in methane detection, quantification, and elimination solutions. That firm, we grew up to working around the world, solving methane issues, whether it's in Canada, US, Azerbaijan, Tunisia, Kazakhstan, and now working under the Montrose fold. I can testify that access to people, partners, relationships, and has opened up doors to helping our clients and helping those decarbonize oil and gas assets and find really unique ways of crafting methane mitigation solutions. So it's great to be here today. Thanks, Brian, and to the rest of the panelists. And I look forward to the conversation.
Sounds great. Thanks, Josh. Elizabeth, would you mind introducing yourself as well?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. My name is Elizabeth McGurk. I am on Montrose's Sustainability and Climate Advisory team. My background is in the air quality space. I've got a little over 11 years of experience in oil and gas permitting and compliance and greenhouse gas inventories. At Montrose, I've done a lot of work in the differentiated natural gas space. So OGMP 2.0, Veritas, I'm an MIQ auditor. And what this means is it's given me the unique opportunity to work with folks all over the Montrose family, pairing projects where we're working with both measurement and inventories, bringing together some really cool teams to address these challenges. So excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thanks. And then Mike.
Yeah, Mike D'Antoni. I joined Josh at GreenPath 9 years ago, and it was an adventure. And we just joined the Montrose family in May, so just a little bit before Matrix. Like Josh, doing methane way before it was cool. So Josh started GreenPath in 2007. I started with the British Columbia government. Well, I was with the British Columbia government in 2007, saying, "What's weird about all these emissions from the oil and gas sector?" I wound up working for an entity that was buying emission reductions on behalf of the government, and then Josh and I joined forces in 2015. Background in sort of really understanding regulations in terms of the government background, was on loan to the Alberta Energy Regulator for about a year before the D60 methane rule. Spent a lot of time with folks in either ECCC or the BC government and sort of have a good perspective on what the regulatory environment looks like.
I feel like that's a great segue to my first question I was going to ask. I mean, part of the reason we're having this conversation is that coming out of COP28 last fall, there were a number of announcements around the world, particularly Canada, US, around regulations either in place or regulations to come. And so I'll put this first question to you, Mike. Can you just give us a high-level overview of kind of what really changed or what those announcements look like coming out of in Canada, but also if you're able to provide a brief comparison to how we make contrast with our neighbors to the south, because we know that the U.S. tends to lead in this regard in most settings.
Yeah, it's been an interesting ping pong back and forth of who's ahead on methane reduction. They were kind of ahead, then they had 2016 happen and kind of fell a little bit behind, and now they look like they might pull ahead depending on the way you want to look at things. I think the biggest thing is in understanding the regulatory environment it's not set yet. In Canada, you're at Gazette 1, which isn't the final regulatory rule. Gazette 2 will come out, which will basically be the final regulatory rule. So there's still some wiggle room in what the regulation actually looks like. And in terms of how regulations play out in Canada, is that the federal government will set a regulatory framework, and then provinces have the opportunity to come up with an equivalency agreement, which basically gets you to the same place, so the same objective, but in a different manner. So the three main oil and gas producing provinces in Canada all have equivalency agreements, so British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan. So those equivalency agreements will have to be renegotiated. And so BC already has, prior to Gazette 1, had issued their directionality on what revisions to the drilling and production regulation would look like. But I think those might have to be revised based on the outputs of Gazette 1. There still is really no indication of what will happen in Alberta to meet the equivalency requirements of the revised federal regulation. But I think one of the key things is the key no regrets things are, that the screws are getting tighter. The reductions on methane are going from, a 45% reduction to, I would say almost a virtual elimination of methane emissions from the oil and gas supply chain. I think the key difference from my perspective is the most fascinating thing from my perspective is in Canada, we've been unable to put a price on methane in terms of a methane charge. So I know the BC government has looked at that under many different iterations and has never managed to pull it off. But if you look south of the border, there is a methane charge, which is very interesting. I think that's sort of the key difference is you do have more of a financial incentive south of the border from just that basic fact.
Okay. Thanks for that. I don't know, Josh, anything you would add in terms of just what kind of recent changes, recent announcements you saw past few months?
Yeah, you bet. When I look at Gazette 1 and even in the south of the border, it's a push into new technologies or new ways of detection and measurement. And I think most important is big, bold, italics, underlined on measurement, because measurement is what drives OGMP 2.0, level 5. It's what drives MIQ. It's what drives Veritas. It's what drives Inflation Reduction Act, subpart W calculations, and the methane tax fee that Mike is talking about. It's cross-border tax adjustments about energy products entering the European Union. And so what's really interesting is these jurisdictions like Colorado have introduced like methane intensity-based regulations, performance-based. They'll tell the producer, this is your methane intensity, and then you can either accept it or prove it otherwise. And then here in Canada, we have various jurisdictions that are doing various different ways of measurement under current provincial regulations. However, with Gazette 1, we're seeing a push into territories like if you have certain technologies, you would need a 1 kilogram an hour with a 90% probability detection. That's, like we're pushing the limits on technology. And, of course, Moore's law is in full effect at all times in life, and things are going to get twice as better and twice as fast. But it's now, what do we want to be when we grow up, and what do we want to do with the technologies under the regulations and or the voluntary actions to help differentiate energy products that are produced and exported around the world. So I think it's a very exciting time for technology producers. And when I say technology, this is not just hardware, a new valve. Well, it could be, this is AI products, this is blockchain technology, this is satellites, airplanes, and you name it, financial products. Technologies are fastly evolving in this space because, of course, money and geopolitics are involved.
Sounds good. Yeah. Elizabeth, I know that Mike and Josh covered a lot. What else would you add in terms of what you've seen for recent changes that have come out in Canada or the US?
Sure. So one thing I didn't mention in my intro is that I'm the only panelist here who's US based. So I unlike my colleagues, I'm in Texas, so have a little different perspective there. But I think that building upon what Josh said, what strikes me about these new suite of finalized and proposed regulations is how much is so new about them. So Josh brought up the new technology component. Mike brought up the new methane tax proposed in the United States. The other things that are just new and different that I think are really fundamental and point out that we're at the turning point for the industry are we're seeing provisions about super emitters and having third parties having the ability to report emissions to the US EPA that an operator then needs to respond to. That's never been part of a regulation for us before. Beyond that, we're seeing regulations that are going to have to fundamentally change the engineering of new oil and gas sites to disallow things like associated gas flaring, venting, that just are fundamental redesigns on how engineers have looked at these sites before. So there's just, not only is there a lot happening, there's a lot happening that's really novel.
Well, yeah, what you're describing certainly sounds like a bit of a paradigm shift around how regulations used to be both implemented and then enforced as well. I want to make sure I let you go first on this question, but without having to necessarily name any names, how have our clients been responding to all these changes and some of these things you've talked about? And what are you hearing about their kind of confidence level in being able to meet these emission reduction targets that have been put forth?
Right. I think it's really interesting because some of the bigger players especially did get some systems in place. There have been signs that this is coming. When the Inflation Reduction Act came out, it was a dictate that we're going to see the NSPS's change. We're going to see the reporting rule change. We're going to see a tax. Like, it told us all those were coming. So in theory, people knew what would happen. But then actually seeing the rule text and thinking about implementing it, I think is really overwhelming. And one thing that is of a special consideration is that you've got all these rules in different places now. You've got the Canadian rules proposed, you've got the US rules, some finalized, some proposed, you've got the cross-border tax in Europe, you've got the rules in Colorado. There's a lot of things that are very specific to where are you located and where are you sending your product. And all of these rules have slightly different nuances. The inspection frequencies are ever so slightly different, or the control technology requirement is different, or what you have to do to have a new technology in place is different. So making sure that you have all of your ducks in a row and know what rules apply where, I think is something that people are working to get their arms around.
Totally. Yeah, I know as a client, it would be a lot of things coming fast and furious.
Yeah.
Josh, you probably deal with some maybe different players in Elizabeth sees. How are your clients been responding to these announcements and these pending changes?
Yeah, there's definitely a mixed bag of reactions on this. The first group is we just got settled in. We just found cadence. We just got the database built. We just got going on this. And it's changing now. Given Canada, Gazette 2, when finalized, I mean, this doesn't really kick in until January 1st, 2027. So we're talking 3 years away. So granted, we still have to find functional equivalency with the provinces like Mike discussed, but there's timing now ahead. But the way I see with the ECCC regulation is the pendulum swung very far in one direction, and they really threw the gauntlet down in terms of like what could be possible and what potentially will be possible in future Gazette. And so the dragnet has now expanded, and now we're seeing a next layer of producers going, well, I kind of came out unscathed on the first drags because my production type or the rocks that I drill from or the way things were engineered, they might get caught up in the next round. So we're talking about, no venting from pneumatics, how you report measurement and all that side will definitely increase. And then there's those that Elizabeth talked about, the bigger players who seem very much are preparing for the next layer. They've taken advantage of pilot programs, demonstrations, trialing new technologies, for detection, quantification, and reporting purposes to seeing what is feasible, and then starting to understand like what's a lot of the work that we do like on marginal abatement cost curves, and or like a dollar per ton CO2e reduction on various techniques going forward. So now the financial modeling for some companies are being put in place to understand what the capital, kind of the CapEx and OpEx opportunities will be. And the bigger players who've already internalized a carbon value, who has a carbon price, they've kind of set an early metric within. They didn't wait for external forces to tax them. They had an internal tax themselves. And so now they're evaluating projects on a dollar per ton basis for abatement activities. And so I think as we go forward, I think a key message that I would give to those in the audience and those who are talking producers and those around, it's not what you did yesterday. It's what you're going to do tomorrow and the next 3 years, and looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, what do I want to be when I grow up? What kind of company? Am I a minimum regulatory compliant company? Or do I go above and beyond based in the voluntary based methods of OGMP, MIQ, differentiated gas, and being a global player of providing, democratically, socially consistent, gas to the rest of the world. So I think there's some navel gazing ahead for people, for who and companies and what they want to be in the coming days.
That's fair. And I think what you're saying for sure is that not every company was starting from the same starting point. And so how much of a race you have to run still kind of depends on where you've been. We'll ask some questions later on and make you spell out some of that alphabet soup so everyone who is maybe not as familiar with this will understand some of those details. Mike, I know you also touch with, again, different kind of subset of clients. What have you been hearing from those people and how have they responded to these changes?
Kind of the same set of clients, honestly. So, but
Yeah.
I think the way I'd sort of parse it is, depends on which jurisdiction you are has the most clarity right now. So I think if you're primarily a BC focused producer, the Gazette one doesn't give you as much heartburn. I think BC has a reasonably clear pathway based on their initial policy proposal to equivalence. And also it's very interesting that in the later part of this decade, BC will actually be the dominant gas producer in Canada as opposed to Alberta, which is interesting. Saskatchewan has also ratcheted up, has announced changes that I think get them closer to where Gazette 1 is. What the most interesting thing is Alberta, which is the dominant oil and gas producer. If you're in Alberta, I don't know that there is a very clear pathway to the equivalent to Gazette 1 equivalency right now. So I think if you're in BC, I think it doesn't give you as much heartburn. If you're in Alberta, it's still a very much wait and see, and I don't know what's going to happen. And I think Saskatchewan's kind of on the bubble if that's where your focus is.
Oh, thanks for that. I appreciate it. I'll target this next question towards Josh first, and also give everyone else a chance to add to it. Josh, you mentioned measurement being this key anchor point for all this kind of work. What are some of the things that you've seen clients begin developing towards practical solutions that might aid in measurement, which then lead to reduction in reporting?
Yeah, definitely. I think, finding a common yardstick that one measures emission footprints and is critical in the days to come, especially with taxation purposes or cross-border tax adjustments. If one is imperial and one is metric, where does that decimal point float around? And do we got it right? And so, but, luckily being Canadian, we talk both metric and imperial quite fluid. However, with measurement is what we're seeing with producers is moving away from a curve of volume and time where we've done kind of like a static measurement, like a point in time, and the area under that curve right now has been a rectangle or rectangle-ish shape. That's your footprint. that's the tax. That's what you're paying. That's the, and that rectangle is a process right now is you know, is a point source. We're going to get into a point where the area under the curve is very fluid. It's up, it's down, it's positive gas prices, negative gas prices. It's a Friday, it's a Wednesday, it's cross shift. It's those things that drive into your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3s. It's all that side. And so when we look at measurement, it's how do you capture data? Because that's what emission regulations are. It's about data capture and data management to report back to a regulation on the performance of or the activities on oil and gas sites. So, through relationships and partners, we see, it might be a company like Cuvo that is throwing up continuous based video feeds on tanks and flares to saying, how often is this tank emitting? Is this flare on? Is it performing? We have site-wide standalone methane measurement systems, predominant players in the markets, the Cubes, the Sensorians, and then we got long paths of the world that are shooting laser beams. Like, there's a variety of measurement techniques that are evolving now that will match the needs of the process and the area that you're operating within, because a shallow gas well south of Medicine Hat is a completely different beast than a Rockstar 3-phase Condi well gas thing in Grand Prairie that's like moving product, and they have two different needs. And I think what's interesting, the market regulation is driving investments in various measurement techniques that are helping create that true area under the curve and give confidence, so that when the CFO reports carbon liabilities for a publicly traded company, or whether it's an ESG statement, a carbon taxation bill, or an auditor to verify compliance, the technologies are evolving that allow us for a consistent yardstick across operations, and gives everyone kind of an equal playing ground when it comes to their assets.
Yeah, thanks for that, Josh. I think hearing about how the expectation shifts from a regulatory point of view, but also that frequency of monitoring can also be led by some incentives as a producer to know, I actually want to understand, rather than just having a point in time measurement, I need to know what it looked like on a Wednesday versus a Friday, because that might actually have some financial benefits or potentially detriments for me as well.
Yeah.
Mike, what would you want to add to Josh's comments around the practical solutions you've seen so far?
I don't know, actually. I don't think I have anything to add, actually.
Fair enough. Elizabeth, anything you wanted to throw in on that topic around technology solutions?
Yeah, I think mine is less on the technology solutions side of things and more on the what do you measure instead of how do you measure it. So I've worked with a lot of folks on, like I said, OGMP 2.0 implementation, level 4, level 5, level, campaigns where you're getting source level measurements. And I like how that program is set up, because it's saying you look at your emissions inventory and you commit to measuring those sources that you believe are most impactful to your total emissions footprint, and get data on those sources first. Really confirm your understanding of the biggest chunk of your inventory, recognizing that that might be the first part where it's advantageous when you look at your MAC curve to start your mitigation projects. So just kind of starting big, figuring out where to look first, so then you can decide which technologies, to implement, which sources to start measuring, and then use that information to inform both your inventory and, more importantly, your projects to reduce your footprint.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know, well, one of our leaders will always say you always have more good ideas than capacity to execute. And so trying to focus on where you've got those material emission sources first and trying to figure out what you're measuring, how you're measuring, seems like a smart way to prioritize. Elizabeth, I'm going to put this question to you because the acronyms come up a handful of times. So we talk about future regulatory change driving some of these things. We also know that there are these voluntary reduction programs. So Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0 has been mentioned. There's been a handful other mentioned. Because of the work that you do, would you mind just sharing a bit about those voluntary reduction programs and the benefits that some of your clients have seen from participating in those programs?
Sure. So I'm going to stick primarily to OGMP 2.0 because that's where I have worked the most. But by and large, these statements also apply to the other programs like MIQ and Veritas and Trustwell and some of those other voluntary programs as well. So these are programs that are not regulatory driven. They are commitments that a company makes to meet the requirements outlined in these frameworks, and they've gotten some name recognition among lots of different stakeholders at this point, both internal, the public, NGOs, et cetera. It's basically a way to say, hey, we're doing more than being a straight regulatory compliance driven company. A lot of them are focused around this initial commitment to measure and understand and truly quantify your emissions footprint before using that information to inform your reductions projects, your mitigation projects. So it's advantageous because it's telling people that you care. But another thing that I see as a real benefit to these programs is they come with a community. In general, the member companies that are part of OGMP 2.0 or these other groups will get together at some frequency to share ideas, to talk about technologies, to work as a consortium, to study something that there's a desire to improve or to trial. And I think that particularly in the face of a dynamic and challenging regulatory environment where so much is changing at once, getting in with peer groups that have a similar view on the future of the industry is a very good thing, encouraging that collaboration.
Yeah, totally. I think as a Canadian, we would talk about, you got to skate where the puck is going. This idea of trying to see the future a little bit ahead, as opposed to necessarily trying to just keep pace with the regulations that are in the rearview mirror. But that idea of being able to achieve economies of scale and working together as an industry seems like it would have some clear benefits. Josh, anything you would add in terms of the other ways you've seen some of these voluntary reduction programs impacting your clients or benefiting your clients?
Yeah, certainly. I think what's building on Elizabeth's OGMP comments there is there's a difference between paper measurement and actual measurement. And I think there's a lot of up to a level 4 for those who don't know. It's kind of more of you start building up representative samples, you start, emission factors. But when you start getting to level 5, it's like reconciliation work. And this is where the boots on the ground hit. This is where I am in the Western Desert on a Libyan border, standing on top of a 2,000 barrel oil tank, and it's just screaming solution gas off the top. And you're like, okay, I got to measure this. And why? Because Egyptians all want to put product into the European Union. They got to measure this, and their yardstick is OGMP 2.0. And so this is where the challenges of measurements, these are the crews that I drive and work with on a daily basis, are standing on in a 60-foot man lift platform on top of a large power gen unit, trying to connect a thermal mass meter to a vent stream or this, or it's figuring out what is the unique pneumatic profile of devices operating in Saskatchewan. However, it's their true measurement then kicks in, then starts creating a capital certainty of where the actual problems lie, because something that we saw similar in 2020 regs being announced January 1st, leading up to that, we did quite a lot of work with an investment banking group that held large positions in multiple oil and gas companies producing Western Canada. And so they wanted to get a perspective, like, is this going to hurt? Like, do we need to get ready? So an OGI camera goes beyond just finding leaks. You can verify tank tops. You can look for compressor seals. You can look for these other vented sources that are particularly handled, under production accounting methods or other methods, through emission factors, and saying what is of actual concern. So we started building up these reports back to saying, you know what, okay, this company owns 10 main batteries in this area. 8 of them are completely fine. Battery number 2, yeah, you got some solution gas issues. And battery number 1, yep, looks like you acquired that from another company. It's got some legacy issues. Drive down the road, you get to site and you're like, hey, all right, grid power lines coming in, electrified pump jack. But yet that there's a test separator on site and they still have the pneumatics on fuel gas. And you're like, you got grid power. Like, just electrify this now. So it's really interesting as we go forward now, is like understanding where capital confidence will lie in terms of deployment of retrofitting and upgrading, large pieces of fired equipment, compression assets, power generation, fired equipment inventories, and pneumatics, and then also generating, working with the engineering side. So if you're looking to like displace fuel gas use from pneumatics or chemical injection pumps for process control, there's a variety of, nitrogen as a service business or instrument air electrification. But engineers like to engineer it for like certainty, and you don't want to oversize and undersize. So if you start doing really good measurements, you can get your VRU sized up right. You can get that cryogenic nitrogen tank sized correctly it'll give you 6 months of uninterrupted nitrogen supply for your pneumatics, during the snowiest, coldest months of the year. And that then doesn't rock the boat on production, because at the end of the day, producers still need to produce to create the revenue and a return back to shareholders and to, as a corporation. And so then to give them back. And so yeah, as we get going forward, measurement is one of these things that if we start to get it right, gives people confidence, and it gives engineers a job to do. And I firmly believe the path forward is just it's engineering. We can build Tupperware sites. We can do this. I firmly believe it.
As a chemical engineer, I'm happy to take the challenge on that one. I think the thing that I heard that I found informative, at least, is this idea that these voluntary emission reduction programs can help kind of bridge that gap between thinking local and thinking global. And so if I got a fleet of assets that might be in other jurisdictions, well, it doesn't matter where I'm selling those to. And also if I've acquired assets at different times and I can look at those things across the board more holistically, I'll find some solutions or some benefits I can glean from one jurisdiction perhaps that I can apply in a different one to actually achieve the net benefit you want to achieve. Mike, anything you'd want to add from your perspective around some of these emission programs that you've seen?
No, I'm good.
Sounds good. Well, I'm going to come to you with the first kick at this next question, which is a little more broad. But if we ask you to use a crystal ball, and I know it came up that these regulations in Canada don't actually kick in until January 1st, 2027. So if you put yourself at January 1st, 2027, what do you think is one thing that our clients would look back on and be really happy that they did something or they achieved something to get them ready for that January 1st, 2027 deadline?
I think the big thing that we've learned is that most people don't. I mean, one of the simplest no regrets thing is having a good inventory of your equipment. It's amazing that this many years into it, most companies' inventories of pneumatics, fired equipment, all this stuff that really matters is sometimes still scattered in spreadsheets and different spreadsheets, and you have just poor data control. If I said, what's your one no regrets move as we move into this new regulatory environment? It's have a proper inventory of everything that burns gas and vents gas, and have it in a database and not a spreadsheet. Even if you're a small company that has 10 wells, get it into a database, because any sort of spreadsheet management thing. So my background too is a little bit on the auditing side in terms of like ANSI 14065 standard. And basically, anytime you see something in a spreadsheet, you really can't trust it, because people just tend to copy paste. Like, you say, yeah, give me this inventory for this field. And like the operator says, sure, goes to one and then copy paste for the next 12. And it's probably not that. So I think that's kind of that would be the no regrets move that I think every operator should have, is have an inventory, and it better not be in a spreadsheet. That would be my biggest recommendation.
I appreciate that. I'm sure Microsoft's doing just fine, but yeah, I agree. Excel has its own limitations and its benefits. Elizabeth, if you were in that same position of looking back from January 1st, 2027, what do you think is something that our clients would be happy that they were able to accomplish?
Yeah, from a technical perspective, I 100% agree with Mike. Knowing what you have and where, and maybe even how old it is, would be fantastic. So getting away from that kind of technical inventory side and going a little bit more philosophical, I guess. I think there are two ways to think about where we are right now. And one is to be completely overwhelmed and frustrated with the number of changes, the new stuff, the uncertainty about what's going to be challenged in court and what's going to stick. And the other is to settle back and say, you know what? Okay, like this isn't easy, but this is where we are. And really, it's kind of exciting to be on the cusp of transitioning our energy, really thinking about we have the ability to shape how we're going to get to a no methane emissions oil and gas future, because oil and gas is here to stay, but how are we going to do that and how are we going to get there? And being part of the generation of engineers who gets to figure that out, it's not easy, but in some way it's really cool and it's important and it's going to impact generations to come. And I think that reframing how we think about this can impact how we do it and how we feel about it.
Totally. That idea of recognizing that with every great challenge, there's also a great opportunity. And so you're describing something that could be really rewarding for a lot of people to be able to help shape that future.
Exactly.
Josh, what would you add from a perspective of looking back from 2027? What's something that people would be happy they've spent some time on?
That building on kind of the philosophical side of Elizabeth and kind of more of a mentor like to always say to me two things. How you eat an elephant is one bite at a time, and a big juicy elephant has been put on a lot of plates right now. So you might as well just grab some chopsticks and some soy sauce and some ginger and garlic and start enjoying and savoring the taste of elephant for the next 3 years. And the next thing is, plan the work and work the plan. Yes, and like Mike said, Alberta is, because of politics and policy, we don't have clear direction. However, ECCC has, at least in the constellation, pointed a North Star or a direction where things will be going. So I think those who may be saying, it's one thing, you never talk politics and religion at Thanksgiving table. However, regardless of political ideologies, is methane reduction is here to stay. That is of my personal opinion. I do not see a retreat in any state of this side, and going forward, it's best to start now and working forward. So, and it should not be a race to the bottom yet. And then when I say about, what is the minimum amount? And kind of looking at some of the questions ahead here is like, let's know that we need to build the workforce. Let's have confidence that oil and gas is here to stay. And I believe that because the world has an insatiable appetite for energy, and oil and gas and the energy products it creates and the revenue and the wealth and everything else is a blessing. And so in that case, an abundance mindset of going forward so that we can start building what we need for tomorrow. And that is people, processes, systems, and not minimizing it to the lowest common denominator of what minimal is. We'll find what minimal is come January 1st, 2027.
Sounds good. So we already do have, as Josh mentioned, some good questions coming in the Q&A. So I'm going to ask the panel one more question from my perspective, and then we'll open it up. So if you've got a question, just a reminder, you can click that Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen in Zoom, type in your question there, and we'll get to as many as we can. And Josh, just because you talked about the elephant, you talked about one bite at a time, I'm going to then ask you to go from big picture and kind of zoom in. And so if we follow up on our last question, what's that first bite look like? What's the thing people should be doing in 2024 that's going to help them be prepared for this future still to come and getting that whole elephant eaten by 2027?
Acceptance. Acceptance to the fact that this is here.
Okay, I like it.
And thinking long now, going beyond financial quarter to quarter thinking, and start to put, 12 quarters ahead of you in terms of long-term financial thinking. Now, for those companies that don't know what they're going to be a year from now, well, you might solve your own problem, be acquired or merge or something. But for the blue chip players out there, and for those companies that are on a tear and they got growth and those legs and they're going, heck yeah, acceptance and start planning little things. And building on Mike's comments, understand what you own and where you own it. Everything that leaks gas, burns gas, leaks gas. That is then what you can build on. And Excel is not a database.
So unanimous consent on Excel's not a database, which is good. Mike, if I was going to put the same question to you, what do you think people should be focused on in 2024? What's a right near-term kind of move that people should be trying to make?
Yeah, kind of just going back to my initial point, understand what you own, right?
Yeah.
Fundamentally, and sort of understanding those assets and starting to say, okay, am I going to have to control the storage tank, or is this site going to be dead by the time it matters? And prioritizing your capital spend so you don't have stranded capital. That would be my biggest recommendation. So and in Alberta, what was good is you had the Business Reduction Opportunity Assessment Program, which helped a lot of the smaller companies understand what they have, where they own it. The two problems there are the big companies missed out, and then a lot of the stuff is just in a spreadsheet. So it's get everything into a single source of truth so you can make intelligent decisions.
Okay. Elizabeth, what would you recommend for people to try and focus on here in the next 10 months?
Yep, I'm gonna be a broken record here and say plan. I think it's critical to understand what you've got and spend the time to put together a regulatory matrix and timeline for each facility, each group of facility, each site, based on things like where are they located, where are you sending the product, how old are they, because that's all going to impact what applies to you. And because there's so much changing at once and it's different from country to country, from state to state, it is very possible that there are going to be requirements with slightly different definitions, slightly different regulatory requirements, slightly different effective dates that could all apply to the same asset. And you want to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. So just make sure that you understand what you have and what rules apply to it. And then I do want to put in one more plug that, because I do think that this intersection of the regulatory and voluntary space is important and exciting for defining, like Josh loves to say, who you're going to be when you grow up, that this is a really great opportunity to realize that a lot of these regulations are driving folks closer to what the requirements for a voluntary program look like. So as you're setting up your compliance-based program, it might be a really good time to consider whether your company wants to make the leap to becoming an OGMP 2.0 member company or something like that, because you're going to be making some changes anyway. So it just might be a good time to reconsider that option.
Oh, sounds great. So we're going to open up some questions from the audience here. I think one thing that I'd be remiss not to say is, as we harp on the importance of moving away from Excel and quantifying, moving towards databases, this is work that we do. And so all of you will receive an email afterwards in this. You'll have a link to this recording. You'll also have contact information for each of our panelists here today. So if there is something you want to follow up and discuss offline, by all means, reach out to us through that way. The first question we have here is actually a two-part question. So I'm going to ask it in two parts. On the first one, I'll direct towards Mike. And what they're saying is there's a requirement in the proposed federal regulation for a third-party audit. And so the question is, do you think this is going to require companies to become fugitive verifiers with the associated certification, similar to greenhouse gas verifiers?
I honestly don't think so, because we've seen this third-party requirement for a very long time under Directive 84 in Alberta. So in Directive 84, you have monthly surveys, but there's a component for an annual third party to do a survey. So I don't think this is going to cause a major shift in the landscape. I think this has just really come out of an observation that a lot of the academic research has shown that what makes a good OGI technician is stick time, how much time they spend behind the camera, and basically companies that have that function are just generally better at it. So if you have an operator that once a month has to break out his FLIR camera, he's not particularly good at finding leaks as somebody who does it every day.
Totally. I've got two questions on the same topic, and I'm going to try and stitch them together. I'm going to pitch it to Josh, and we're going to see if you're okay with that. If you want me to split it apart again, we can. So there's there's a comment or a question here that says the increase in LDAR surveys that have been proposed by these federal regulations can be quite financially burdensome for companies. So there's a part of the question that says, why is there no consideration for risk-based surveys as opposed to a mandatory number of surveys on the assets? I guess related to that, there's this question that says, do you think the industry actually has the capacity to handle these increased proposed federal fugitive survey requirements? So I guess the two part of that would be, why are we going the direction we're going in terms of mandatory measurements rather than risk-based? And with the direction we are going, how do you feel about the capacity for our industry to keep up with the demand?
Yeah. So in a traditional, call it fugitive emission survey, yes, is there? And it goes back to that like not a race to the bottom right now, but starting to build up the workforce needed and allowing for things to going forward. We do have the people, we can do that. However, as a service provider myself, there's two things that I'm always fearful of as a service provider: a politician I don't know about and a technology yet to be developed. So do I see it being financially responsible to both a service provider and industry to be doing absolutely everything on a monthly basis? Probably not, because I'm going to be holding a lot of capital on equipment, people, and trucks, only to either have a politician or a technology change that allows for a decreased frequency in those inspections. However, they will be an increased frequency, either quarterly, biannual, or more frequent that we can handle quarterly. We can do that with the right people in the right places. I spent quite a bit of time in Colorado working on some consent decrees for a company based around tank VOCs. And I saw what a well-dedicated 25-person LDAR team is capable of and the backgrounds of where they came from. These guys that were working in gravel pits, feedlots, and other things, but they had the work ethic to work when it's hot, work when it's cold, work when it's dusty, and get the job done. So we have the Canadian get it done, roll up our sleeves spirit in us. It will get her done. There's no doubt about it. Now, when I look at the next kind of question is, I think there's a really interesting topic here, and this is a whole other webinar in this series. There is a potential transition from removing the definitions of leak and vent and going to a performance-based regulation. And that then performance-based regulations allow you to just focus on the bad. However, there's certain things that get caught up in performance-based regulations. Now, methane slip, incomplete combustion, certain storage tank issues, certain things that were not caught up in the definition of, they were in the vent category. And I was within my 15 E3, M3, or 15 decks a month limit, or this other things. And so I think you kind of get what you wish for. And if we do go down the performance side, there could potentially be some other high capital costs on pounding down the highest pegs. And so this might be being like grid electrification of, Western Canadian gas compression. This could be like upgrading boilers and other large sources. This could be, for SAGD producers, and actually they're doing a lot of good work on that side on boilers and other aspects of fired equipment. And so going down that route. Now, of course, if a company is just a bunch of shallow gas wells in southern Alberta, yeah, performance-based regulation probably work very well for you, and you can just kind of snipe off what you need, do a few things, and get out there. But there will still be some form of auditing involved, like building on the fugitive emission auditing side. There will be increased data records. There will still be prove it. You will still need to prove that performance side. And performance is measurement, and measurement requires a common yardstick.
Oh, that sounds good. There are a couple questions here that are, again, kind of interwoven, but I'll put this one to Elizabeth first, and then you can decide if you want to add on any more. The question is really around the audience member saying that their understanding is Canada doesn't have a lot of participation in voluntary initiatives so far. And so the question is, why is there still uptake in Canada, and what will it take to get more participation? And as you probably see, there's a question here also in the same vein of that is, why do these companies join? So what would your perspective be on what it would take for more companies to join OGMP 2.0?
Yep. So what we saw with OGMP 2.0 is that the early adopters were primarily European-based companies. The ultimately that made sense. Recently, we saw in Europe that they are modeling their carbon tax adjustment like on OGMP 2.0. You look at their requirements and they're essentially mirrors for each other. It regionally took off there first, and it started to impact legislation and requirements in that space. 1 second, excuse me, my voice went funny.
No problem.
Regionally, in the last, I would say 6 months, my team has seen a lot more interest from the United States. We've started working with companies who are US based, who aren't the super majors. They're more the small to mid-sized players in the market. And the reason they told us that, why are you interested now? You know, your colleagues across the ocean here started first. Why now for you? And they said, you know, one, we're starting to see our friends do this. We're getting questions about it from our stakeholders, but also the regulatory wins are driving us towards measurement-based regulations and compliance anyway. So it seemed like this was a way to start getting our programs in place to put together a solid measurement-informed inventory that will impact our other compliance here. And so I expect that we're going to start to see something similar from Canadian companies as well, that there's starting to be more of a name recognition regionally for the program. And we're starting to see more and more requirements that are looking a lot like OGMP 2.0 anyway. And so it's a good time to consider it because you're getting most of the way there anyway. And I will also say that for those who import product to Europe, you're being hit with something that essentially looks exactly like OGMP anyway.
That's the universal
expectation. Exactly.
Yeah.
Josh,
you want to add to that?
Yeah, you bet. You know, we talking with customers, you know, large players here in Western Canada, is they come to me and say, Josh, I'm looking at all these logos, MIQ, Veritas, OGMP, Trustwell, you know, there's a lot of logos that offer a different variety of pathways to measuring or demonstrating. And that is being driven by the financial investment community and bankers behind these companies. They are asking them, I want you to pick a logo. I want you to go down that pathway because we want to start having some assurances that you're going to be addressing your liabilities and that we can build shareholder confidence that you are able to operate in a low carbon economy. So it is signaling back out to the financial markets that you take decarbonization serious and that you are a long-term player and that you are addressing these societal and regulatory issues within your company.
Nice. So we got a couple other questions here that relate to technology. And I guess one specifically is about panel having thoughts about specific technologies or methodologies for dealing with compressor engine exhaust. So there's a specific question that anyone want that piece of it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Methane slip is big.
Okay.
It can be measured. And that's, you know, contentious, may or may not be contentious, depends on the eye beholder, like the Carleton studies that have flown over Alberta and BC and kind of done that top-down, bottom-up measurement informed inventory approach in the aspects. But compression is, these are big engines running at a lower RPM. And so, you know, there's very interesting things happening. Now, there's no silver bullet. A straight up methane catalyst on an exhaust stream needs a very high temperature to achieve, you know, proper degradation of methane. But however, places like California have demonstrated that these engines are able to operate in a low NOx, but also kind of reduce methane at the same time. And so a variety of catalytics to handle NOx through more of a, now, I'm granted there's going to be some engine nerds out there and the fleet guys email me, let me know where I went wrong on this. But we spent a lot of work leaning out Canada's engine fleet for NOx purposes. But however, when you lean an engine out, you potentially can get an increased methane slip. So I think one is properly tuning an engine in the right aspect of, hey, maybe I go back to Richburn, manage NOx with a catalyst, which is quite capable, and California has proved it, and I've reduced methane slippage. Or starting to look at the newer kind of style of Caterpillar or Waukesha engines that are out there that not only reduce emissions, but they sip fuel gas, and they're highly reliable, and they're great for production purposes. And I know the engine guys are really liking the new iron that's getting put on the ground from a production purpose, but the gravy is a lower emission footprint. And then there are some novel TRL 6-7 kind of companies that are coming out there. We're looking at like hydrogen injection into the compressor cylinders to increase combustion temperatures, to just scavenge up and burn up all that gas before it goes out the exhaust stream. We're looking at some other novel end of pipe technologies. And this is not getting into the carbon sequestration world, the CCS for the big stuff. This is more of your 400 or 900 horsepower engine out in the middle of nowhere doing its business. And so the stuff is evolving out there, and the technologies are there, and it just comes down to what is right for that engine. An electrified compressor does not have any methane slip because it's an electric driver.
That is a solution. Yeah.
It's so there's a variety of pathways, and there's no right, and it's not quite ready there. However, going back to these compressions and the engines and the other things like compressor seals, there are a variety of techniques of scavenging compressor seals to go back into the engine as fuel gas. You're using less fuel gas. You're taking a vent source and turning it into a fuel thing. So there are a variety of techniques here and now. However, the drivers aren't driving yet, but in the future here. And so again, it's going to come down to this elephant. How do we start picking away at the engines as we get going? And measurement. We've been doing a lot of work in the methane slippage space and doing actual stack measurements and getting a baseline. Where are you at? Is this engine of concern? If it's not, forget about it for now.
Focus on that for now.
Let's focus on the bad and see what we can do.
Wonderful. We are about 3 minutes from the top of the hour, and I respect that a lot of people have places to go and things to do. So I think we should wrap up unless any of our panelists has one last parting thought they wanted to offer. We will say thank everybody for joining us. I really appreciate your time. All of you who participated will receive, like I said, an email following up. And if you do have questions, we would also love to hear from you. And you can find more information about us at montrose-env.com. So thank you all again for the panelists, and thanks for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone
out there. Thank you.